I'm here with the incredibly talented Shaun Baxter, who's just completed a guitar masterclass for Wishaw Guitar Lessons. How are you, Shaun?
Very good, thank you. A bit hoarse, probably, in this interview after doing so much talking, but I'll do my best.
For those who couldn't make the class, could you just tell the viewers a little bit about what was going on today?
So the main emphasis was on taking the fear out of playing jazz, I suppose, really. Not traditional jazz or playing chord melody stuff, but actually improvising over different chord types and chord changes, and how that could be applied to a sort of rock setting, I suppose, because I'm not a jazz player, but I do study the music, and it has made me a better rock player as a consequence. So just trying to talk the guys into the merits of adopting it as a sort of character building hobby, really, and hopefully it'll develop from there.
Cool. Could you talk a little bit about your formative years as a guitar player? You're saying about, obviously you started as a rock player. Were you practicing, one of the 10 hours a day guys?
Once I decided that I was going to be a guitar player, or that I had some interest in guitar, I never entertained the thought of doing anything else. I was very single-minded about that. I can see my teenage boys now, especially my eldest, going through all the sort of trials and tribulations of what he's going to do, what he's going to study at university, and the younger one, what A-levels he's going to do, and having to sort out their sort of career path. I never had that, because even though I started very late, at sort of 16, and was only like playing bass in a punk band, which, as I said last night, doesn't really count really, because musically it's so basic. You could probably use it in one of those sort of corporate music therapy events where you go into a room full of people who've never played before, give them a bass and get them to play some Sex Pistols numbers, just going da 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 da. But at the age of 16 or 17, I sort of picked up the guitar and joined like a prog rock band that was in my class, and I couldn't play basically, but I was pretty single-minded, put my head down and sort of got on with it in a very analytical, I now realise, sort of fashion, and within a year or two I got really quite proficient. I was very enamoured by Michael Schenker. He was a big influence on me. I learnt the old sort of traditional way at that stage. I was wearing out my vinyl records, so AC/DC, Thin Lizzy, trying to make sense of it. I discovered the pentatonic scale. Didn't know it was called a pentatonic scale, but I knew if I played these two notes a string with that bulgy bit there, and I bent this note and I bent that note, and I thought I'd discovered the secret of which I had, of course, but a bit late, and used to enjoy at that stage sort of playing on the weekend in some sort of garage and learning tunes, and gradually getting more and more distracted by guitar and excuse me, and devoting more time to it. So by the time I'd sort of finished my A-levels, I had enough innate talent as a artist, a painter, drawer, to go to art college. But I knew at that stage that I would use art college as a means of treading water and just pursuing guitar playing. And by the time I got to my third year of art college, my final year, I didn't do my final year. I went to London to do session work, and I'd already got to the point where I was playing professionally and whatever, so I was about 18 or 19 there. I had gone through a phase where I was completely besotted with Alan Holdsworth, really, and Van Halen. I think everyone's got to sort of go through that phase, and so they should. And I think when I got out of art college, when I was in art college, I played some my sort of, not demo tapes, but some of my garage band practice to one of my sort of fellow students, and he said, yeah, it sounds like Michael Schenker, doesn't it? And I said, oh yeah, it's good, isn't it? And he said, yeah, but it sounds like Michael Schenker. And the penny wasn't dropping for me. And what he was saying, of course, was that I was destined to just be another copyist had I just sort of gone down that road. And obviously I was at that stage where I'd used, you know, players like that to get elevated from not being able to play to, through emulation and all that sort of stuff, to play like that and demonstrate the sort of control and vocabulary and go down a particular road. Because I mean, I wasn't listening to a country player or a blues player, I was listening to particular rock players. But I, at that point, just as I moved to London to sort of pursue a more of a career in music, I went right back to the drawing board, and by making a conscious effort of throwing out everything that I had that I didn't feel was the starting point of something that was potentially a new style or a personal style. And again, I was very methodical about it. I remember going to the corner. I can see them now, these books. I bought some sort of like kiddie sort of exercise books, that like ruled, lined paper. And I had a sweep picking book, a legato book, and all that sort of stuff. Now, remember, these terms were in their infancy, you know, when I was doing that, because there were very few books and videos out, and very little in terms of magazines. So I was left pretty much to my own devices, you know, and I think it was only Phil Hilborn and I were actually writing in Britain then at that time. But I was living in Camden. I'd had all my equipment stolen and I wasn't insured, and I thought, well, I could either go back to Wales with my tail between my legs, or I'm going to stick it out here. And it was sort of a pretty lonely time, and I was in a bedsit on my own, being very regimented in my practice regime. I'd get up, I'd be very methodical, as I said, you know, I had all my playing split into different sort of categories, and I did play, to, you know, long and winded answer to your question, 10, 12 hours a day. I'd literally sort of get up, you know, play, eat, and go to bed again, and that was it. I didn't know anyone in London. I was intent on staying up as much as I could. A mutual friend knocked on my door, a guy called John Sloman, who was the singer for Uriah Heep and Lone Star and Gary Moore. I knew him. He was probably the reason I was up in London in the first place. When I was in art college, I got introduced to him at a club called Bogey's Bar in Cardiff, which is like a rock club. And I think it was I had a bit too much to drink, and I started shouting in my mouth off to him. I think he had a Gary Moore t-shirt, and I was like, yeah, I got up better than him and all that sort of stuff. And he, for some reason, remembered me. And when he went back to London, he kept phoning me up just periodically to see how I was getting on. And I ended up doing a session with it. At those days, record companies used to give money to people to develop sort of demos and stuff like that. They don't do much of that anymore, but EMI had paid John some money to do some recordings of his new songs, and he wanted to try me out. In that time of meeting him as a Michael Schenker sort of fledgling, and then next having that EMI sort of session, which was probably about 9 months, I had transformed into more of a Holdsworth clone rather than a Schenker, but at least it was a more sophisticated sort of thing. Touring doesn't appeal to me that much. I've done a bit of it in the past, you know, I toured the world with Carl Palmer, but there's something about the brain-numbing sort of repetition and the sort of representation of what you've already done many times before, especially if the stuff is very scripted, that I find sort of quite wearying, you know, to do. Whereas, and I can see why jazz musicians sort of perhaps play well into their dotage, because every night is a new one, and it's sort of whereas if you're a pop artist sort of going out playing the same songs time and time again, that doesn't appeal to me. So, and the reason I mention that is that in terms of what I try to achieve as a guitar player, is leaving my mark and pushing for some reason, I don't know why, I wanted to have been seen to contribute in some way like that, and then to have made a difference. And I think in terms of the guitar community, that has sort of washed through now, like decades later, because I can see a sort of another generation of guitar players come up that openly admit, about the influence of, my articles, and perhaps they've come through the sort of the various schools, or one of them that are based on the Guitar Institute, where it's, it's ACM or BIM or whatever, those places were set up by alumni from the Guitar Institute, and it's sort of all started from what was just a front room of a house, to start off with, and then blossomed into different instruments, and was only part-time when it actually started as well. But having done that, what I enjoy the most is leaving some sort of artistic legacy. So a recording, for example, is far more meaningful to me than a great gig that gets lost in the ether and is just people's memories. One gig comes to mind, the last one that I played before leaving London, and last gig I played with my band, big sort of hot sweaty pub full of guitar fans, and we played a lot of sort of jazz metal stuff. It was me and Paul Elliott and Terry Gregory. He was on the jazz metal album, and it was a great, as I said, sort of hot, sweaty pub environment. Everyone sort of really up for it, and pity we didn't video it, really, because, as I said, that memory has just got lost now. And you do it, and it's okay when it happens, and then it's gone. So I think the way I would see the sort of pursuing and getting back to the reasons why I played guitar, is to start recording again, and documenting in some way where I am in my development now, because even though I've played less, I've still developed musically, and I can look back, 20 years ago. I should be able to look back 20 years ago and think that I've made some sort of advancement, but there is more maturity and more sophistication, and I've got more things to say, and that's sort of next on the list for me, really. And it is important for me to do that, because what's the point in improving and getting better if you've got nothing to show for it at the end,
So definitely for you then it's the recording, and the
yes,
follow-up to jazz metal would be the...
Yes, it is. I mean, we all joked earlier in the class about this sort of difficult second album syndrome, the fact that it's taken me 20 years to do the replacement. But I have done a lot of stuff in other circles outside that. But I'm sort of, I would get enjoyment from that, and actually I think that I've still got decades of a working life left and they do say if you do a job you enjoy, you don't really ever work, it doesn't feel like it, and I think what I realise is that I find composing quite easy and quick, and I have to compose quite a lot for the Guitar Techniques magazine. I just routinely have to do sort of MIDI arrangements for bass, drums, keyboards and stuff like that, and as I've done that more over the years, I've got better at it, and I can write good drum parts and bass parts and stuff like that. And I think your responsibility as a composer doesn't end at your first instrument. You need to know about the other instruments and those sort of arranging skills and stuff, and so I like to think that not only will I find an outlet for guitar, and I must say, hand in hand with that is that is what I see the big distinction between all the guitar playing that's out there now, and there's more of it than there's ever been with the internet, and stuff that's meaningful to me. And what's meaningful to me is good composition, and I see a lot of jamming over static backing tracks, whereas the things that I respond to the most as a music fan are well constructed pieces of music. I think of something like Solemn, by Scott Henderson off the Doctor He album, something that's sort of written and really well orchestrated, like a piece of chamber music, you know. I can listen to Going for the One by Yes, some of the pieces off that, you know, Turn of the Century or something like that, beautifully orchestrated, you know, very pleasing sort of structure, well played, everything in its place, and no, all the fat has been trimmed off, you know, unless you can use a piece of theory or a technique to express something meaningful and ideally with some beauty to it, then it's not of any use, certainly not to me. And I don't feel that a lot of players are in pursuit of that, and often get wrapped up with the sort of circus act of it all, and the sort of Olympic sport, which is good to a certain extent, and I really can understand why that appeals, especially to young guitar players. But you know, I think it can only sustain the listener's interests for so long, you know, and I think at the end of the day it's got to be something that's musically meaningful, and I think composition is part of that, and I also think that, you know, rather, you know, the speed should be used as a means of expressing an idea that just happens to be fast but meaningful, rather than grandstanding as a technique in its own right, you know, because, you know, that's sort of, it's quite glib, I think, that, but that's just a personal thing, but understandable, but probably the only danger, and make sure that the sort of people don't lose sight of that, you know.
Yeah, cool. So just kind of wrapping it up, obviously you've been, you know, very visible in the guitar community for, you know, over 20 years.
Yeah.
Is there a sort of core sort of concept or sort of mantra that you would like to share with the viewers about your entire sort of, you know, your creative rock column? And is there something that you want to share that kind of covers the gamut of what you're really trying to share with the world?
I think in some respects it turns us full circle, whereby, you know, that time when I realised that, you know, if you want to make your mark on the world, you know, not just of guitar playing, but artistically in any walk of life, you've got to have something unique to contribute, or you will just be sort of relegated to the hordes of proficient sort of players or artists or whatever, and it means that, you know, you, as long as you're individual and unique in some way, you avoid competition. You know, somebody like the Edge of U2 wouldn't know a 3-octave arpeggio if he fell over it in the street, you know, but who cares, you know, because he is an integral, unique ingredient of that band. My mum could recognise Brian May when he comes on the radio. Mark Knopfler's got a unique, you know, the highly individual and recognisable style. And these guys aren't virtuosos, they're just great at what they do. And I think the emphasis for me has always been to appreciate that, and to some extent, you know, you can pursue it in an almost sort of cynical fashion, to realise it and try over the period of time to get that image of whatever and whoever you are as a player, and let that crystallise over time. But as it does, everything you start to, you know, once you've got that image forming, everything you do, everything you practice gets tailored towards that end, and therefore you've got a real purpose behind it, and as a consequence, you know, when I've decided what it is that I like about guitar playing, I have sort of shaved off all the other aspects of what people would think of being obligatory skills, such as fingerstyle, funk rhythm guitar, etc., you know, because they don't form part of what I do, and so there are huge holes in my playing, but not, you know, as a guitar player in general, but not in terms of that they're not missing from my style, because they were never part of the grand design, if you like, you know.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thanks a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.